Mini episode 856 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode number 856. This is FDH managing partner Rick Morris. We have one of our favorite and most distinguished recurring guests that we've had over the years coming back on the show. He is a best-selling author. We have had him on to talk about his books previously. His latest one, entitled Why Wall Street Matters. It is very, very interesting, and particularly in this time of Donald Trump and of some of the push that is on for regulatory reform. One of many initiatives out of this administration that is somewhere stalling in Congress, it seems like at the moment, but it's going to be a topic of conversation in the next couple of years. And books like this are really going to help focus the American public on what's important about that. And again, this gentleman has written about many interesting subjects over the years as well. And one of his past books is tied into something in the news here. He wrote an article recently about a gentleman who was covering the Duke lacrosse scandal back in the day. Of course, his book, The Price of Silence, The Duke lacrosse scandal, the power of the elite, and the corruption of our great universities, covered that subject matter. It came out in 2014, and a take on the book, I guess a loose take on the book, formed an ESPN 30 for 30 that, as we discussed the last time he was on ESPN, kind of went in the opposite direction of some of the things that he wrote. But it is always a pleasure to get this gentleman on the show. I speak, of course, of William Cohen. And again, it's always a very fun and interesting conversation with him. William, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Appreciate you making time for us, sir. How are you today?
I'm good, Rick. Thank you very much.
Pleased to have you back on. And this book that you have is certainly very, very intriguing. As you have pointed out in some of your media appearances, a little bit kind of counterintuitive that when you say why Wall Street matters, we may be predisposed to think of that in a negative kind of a term, that Wall Street is this foreign occupying force that only brings corruption and misery and greed and deceit to American life. But as you point out in the book, there are many things that it does to help make our capitalist system. It is what basically leads the efficiency to it, and that it is essentially not something that, of course, is in and of itself evil, but can be corrupted, and basically, as I've seen you point out in your media appearances, needs to be regulated in the right kind of way, which brings us to what Trump is looking to do here with going back and looking at some of the reforms that were put in place. And as you have very wisely pointed out, I think, that's a good idea, to go back in, look at things, and see how we are regulating Wall Street, and that it is a way that it is effective, but not overbearing and stifling the economy.
You know, you're absolutely right, Rick. I agree with you completely. I mean, I think that what we've experienced for the last 8 years in this country is sort of a willingness by politicians and therefore the public generally and the media to blame Wall Street for all the ills that we're facing as a country. I mean, there's no question that Wall Street had an important and devastating role in causing the financial crisis. There's no question that they weren't held accountable for their role in the crisis. There's no question that people are angry about that. There's no question that the Justice Department failed us by not holding Wall Street accountable for their bad behavior. And basically, there's no question that Wall Street is likely to again act poorly and potentially cause a crisis, because the thing that gets people to change their behavior, what they're compensated to do, what they're incentivized to do on a regular basis, has not been changed. There's been no change to the compensation system on Wall Street, which is one of the main reasons that people behave the way they do. On the other hand, I was getting increasingly concerned that we were like, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that we were blaming Wall Street for everything because it's, sort of a fun, easy thing to do. And people had just like sort of completely forgotten all of the essential things that Wall Street does. I mean, everything from, the iPhone, which we, basically now take for granted, and like something like 1.2 billion of them have been sold, to stocked supermarket shelves, to pickup trucks filled with gasoline, to gun racks with guns on them. All of those things, whether we take completely for granted, would not be possible without the role Wall Street plays in financing and providing capital to companies that need it so that they can build new plant and equipment, they can buy inventory, they can hire more people and pay them higher wages. All the things that Wall Street does, that they do every day and do actually pretty darn well. We actually should step back and celebrate that, because I'm pretty sure that not very many people in this country, or the world, frankly, would want to live in a world without the things that Wall Street provides to us. So instead of like denigrating Wall Street on a regular basis, which, believe me, I know is fun and it's easy, it's low-hanging fruit. Who's going to stand up for people who make hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year to push paper around all day? I get that completely, but that doesn't change the importance of the basic function that Wall Street does. And most people have no idea. So my thought was, I'll write this book. It'll be simple. It'll be easy to understand. It'll be short. Most of my other books that you referred to are long. They're like 500 or 600 pages. This is about 150 pages. It's short. It's easy to read. And people can just pick it up and, really, if they hunker down with it for an hour or so, begin to understand all the things that Wall Street does that are so important and that we should be celebrating, while at the same time remembering that we have a bunch of things we need to fix about Wall Street so that it doesn't cause us the kinds of problems that it's been causing us for the last generation or so. And they're not that hard to fix, but unfortunately we, get this huge bureaucracy that falls in love with things like Dodd-Frank law, which is 2,300 pages long, and, a bunch of gobbledygook that nobody understands. And actually, I think the one thing that Trump is trying to do that will potentially be good, if he doesn't take a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel, is to repeal some of these fairly onerous regulations and rules that are making it very difficult for people who need capital to get it.
See, that's interesting, and I wanted to follow up by asking you about broader regulatory reform, so that was an excellent instinct on your part. And by the way, in terms of the compact and highly readable nature of the book, a testimonial on national TV from Gayle King, who said it was ideal for putting in her purse to be able to pull out and read at a subsequent time, so that certainly persuaded people, I think, along the lines of what you were saying about that. But in terms of regulatory reform, I have to tell you, from my personal example, my brother is a business consultant down in Atlanta, and about a year ago we were talking about things, and we both thought Hillary was going to win the election. So he said to me, it's not going to happen in the next election here, but whoever, if somebody beats her in 2020 and they go and they really take a look at regulatory reform, he said, you wouldn't believe the things I'm seeing in the business world right now, the things, especially small businesses, but really at all levels, some of the barriers to entry, some of the things that are just choking the system here as we continue to pile up regulations and never go back and take a look at what's being done. So I've remembered what he said. I'm looking at this now, and I've had it said to me by some people that the rise in the stock market they're attributing since Trump came in, the very steep rise that there's been, in part has been this kind of sense of freeing of burdens. There hasn't been a lot of legislation that's gone through Congress, but there's been a decent amount with executive orders. So in terms of going back in, and along the lines of what you were starting to get to there, in terms of broader regulatory reform, what's being done with the Trump administration and what could be done, what promise do you see for being able to free up the economy to go in a more efficient manner?
Look, I think that probably President Obama and the Obama administration meant well. I mean, I think they probably had it in their head that they didn't want Wall Street to again cause a financial crisis. And President Obama appointed this guy, Daniel Tarullo, to be, a Fed governor whose job it was to regulate Wall Street. And Dan Tarullo probably thoughts in his mind that things that he was doing to sort of were in effect de-risking the financial system by taking risk out of the Wall Street banks. But I think that really what the effect of Dodd-Frank was, and the Volcker Rule, and all these rules and regulations, I think Davis Polk, the law firm, tallied up that there were more than 20,000 pages of rules and regulations. What this collectively had the effect of doing, in my judgment, is throwing sand into the gears of what I consider to be the beautiful machine that is capitalism. There are ways to regulate people's behavior, and I specifically think that the best way to do that is by changing what you reward people to do, changing the compensation system on Wall Street, changing the incentive system on Wall Street. If you do those things, you'll get people to change their behavior. But by making it more and more difficult for banks, especially big banks and community banks, to lend to small and medium-sized businesses, which are the largest job creators in the country and employ more people in the country than the big firms. I'm telling you something. Big companies, private equity firms, hedge funds, asset management firms, all those big pools of capital and companies like GE and Johnson & Johnson and Google and Facebook, those guys don't have any problem getting capital. They can get all the capital they want at very cheap prices. I'm not worried about them one bit. But I am worried about the small and medium-sized businesses that have been choked off from the capital market system and can't get the capital they need, in large part because the regulators, like Dan Tarullo, has made it very punitive for the banks to lend those small and medium-sized businesses money because they are less than investment grade. And they make these banks take a charge to their capital to make those kinds of loans, and as a result, the banks don't want to take that charge, so they don't make those loans, and small and medium-sized businesses cannot get the capital they need. It's just a fact, and it really irritates me when people say, oh no, there's been this flood of capital available. Yes, there's plenty of capital available for big companies and for private equity firms and for hedge funds and all those people like that, but there is not a lot of capital available for small and medium-sized businesses, and I think and I believe that what some of the things that Trump is talking about doing, or his advisors are talking about doing, because I'm not sure Donald Trump really has a clue about all of this, will make it easier for banks to make those loans to small and medium-sized businesses, which will make it easier for those small and medium-sized businesses to grow, to build new plant and equipment, to hire the people that they need, to pay them higher wages, and to get our economy moving beyond 2% GDP growth, where basically it's been condemned to be for the last 8 years. And that's why, a lot of people would say that is the sort of basis, the foundation of the movement that resulted in the election of Donald Trump. It's because people were missing out. Sure, people on the coast were doing great. People who make money from money were doing great because money's so cheap. People who are sort of, making shows for HBO do great. But people in the heartland who had manufacturing jobs were losing those jobs because those companies can't get the capital they need. And I think some of this regulatory reform that Donald Trump is talking about, and if he hasn't wounded himself politically too much, it will actually happen, I think will get the economy moving again beyond 2% growth. And that's why the stock market is at, 21,500 or 400 today, because which is, a huge material move up, and it's all been on the come because, as you say, he hasn't passed any legislation yet. And I'll tell you something, the market will collapse if he doesn't start passing some of this regulation that people are hoping it'll do. But I'm actually, I don't love a lot about what Donald Trump is doing, I have to be honest with you. But when it comes to this kind of regulatory reform, I do think it's the right thing.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And moreover, what strikes me in a lot of what you're saying is it seems like there's a lot of ground there that one would think that people on both sides could basically agree upon. And again, leaving aside the polarization of the parties, party leadership, the intractability of that kind of a thing, because cards on the table. My candidate in the last election, I'm a guy who likes public policy, ideas, everything like that. I was for Rand Paul, and I was looking at, I'd gotten this very great book that Ralph Nader wrote about left-right alliances, and they've really kind of fascinated me, because I have some friends on the left that I agree with on trade and on realism and foreign policy and those kinds of things here. One of the things that Rand Paul likes to do, if he's before a hostile audience, is say, can we at least agree that government shouldn't do thus and such, and find areas of common ground like that. And what you're talking about there in terms of perverse incentives from the government, that seems like something that the left and the right, that people on both sides should really be talking about, should they not? Because that is one of the things that just, it's big business and big government being in bed together. That's one of the worst things that could happen.
Right, and you're right, but then you've got, one of the things that caused me to write this book is, our old friend Elizabeth Warren, who just is zealous on how much she hates Wall Street and just goes off on it every opportunity she gets. And I've spoken to her now, and she can be very charming, and I get that, and that's very persuasive. But the truth of the matter is, she has to be more understanding about the important role Wall Street plays. So when she legs into Wall Street at every occasion, and people end up hating Wall Street, then what they're really doing is sort of condemning us to this slow 2% growth. And she's actually, by doing that, ends up hurting the very people that she wants to help, which is the working class Americans, the poor, the middle class Americans, who are feeling left out of what's ever been going on in this country for the last 10 years. And actually, she should support, as I do, smart reform of Wall Street to make sure that Wall Street doesn't blow us up again, and meanwhile gets back to the business that's so important of providing capital to small and medium-sized businesses that need it, that want it, that can use it, to build new plant and equipment, to hire more people and pay them higher wages, and that will get this economy moving again. To just have this blanket hatred of Wall Street and condemnation of Wall Street just is not counterproductive. So talk about reaching across the aisle. I would like to, have join hands with Elizabeth Warren and join hands with the other progressives in Congress and make sure that they understand all the important things that Wall Street does, which is another reason I wrote this book, because I thought they need to understand this. And I think, you get to be a certain age in your life and a point in your life, and you can't admit that you don't understand what Wall Street's all about, because then you'll be embarrassed in front of your friends or whatever, or even if it comes up. And so this is a book that you can read that will, secretly you can buy a copy of it, and no one will think you're an idiot, and you can understand finally what Wall Street's all about, and the good things that it does that need to be celebrated, and the things that it does wrong that need to be fixed. And we should have that debate.
Well, we should, and this is very good stuff, and this is the kind of stuff I love talking about on the show. But that sort of takes me to an area that is less sort of a delight of mine, and that being some of the state of discourse in politics these days. I was very much taken with the column that you wrote about this gentleman Stephen Miller, who works in the White House, and how again he got his start back at Duke, covering the whole lacrosse scandal thing here. Of course, your book, The Price of Silence, The Duke Lacrosse Scandal, The Power of the Elite and the Corruption of Our Great Universities. That gave you a certain perspective on all of this, and a very interesting profile that you did in Vanity Fair as far as breaking down his career, his roots of it then. We've talked about this kind of thing on the show previously. I go back to the 2012 election. There was an observation that I made when I was bemoaning Mitt Romney being the Republican nominee, because again, I said on the show at the time, not Romney beat not Obama in the election here. That was an election that was bereft of ideas, and that the right, it seemed to me at that time, had just sort of broadly become the anti-left. And I guess I hadn't seen anything yet with Trump coming, because Trump basically is nothing but pure anti-left. And Stephen Miller really kind of represents this, and what you traced it back to the Bush years when, the Bush Republicanism was sort of at its nadir, and maybe some of the roots of it came then as far as trolling the other side, making that what you're all about as far as promoting ideas. But I look at this here, and Stephen Miller working in the White House, and I don't say this with any kind of malice, I have nothing against the man necessarily, but the fact that he's got a job there as opposed to some of the political writers that I really enjoy. Matt Lewis, one could imagine him working in a smart Republican administration. Timothy Carney, certainly, one could imagine that potentially, if either of those guys was looking to get out of journalism. Instead, we get Stephen Miller, a guy who's about platitudes, bumper stickers, grievances, that kind of stuff. So, in a lot of ways, as you were profiling him, I mean, did you find him to be just sort of a perfect poster child for where we're at in politics right now?
I really do. I mean, he is, it's such a crazy story. I mean, on so many levels. I mean, I honestly cannot believe that Trump would have a guy like this so close to him in the White House. It's just, I mean, if he would read my story, he would say, I mean, any normal person would say, I can't have this guy anywhere near me. I mean, the truth is, this kid grew up in Santa Monica, California, which obviously was a bastion of left-wing liberalism and progressive thinking, and he decided to get attention. He was going to be, conservative, right-wing, and be anti-liberalism, anti-progressive. I don't even think he necessarily believed what he's saying, but I think he liked to get the attention, and he got plenty of attention for being a conservative 13-year-old in liberal Santa Monica, California. And he went so far as to stop being friends with people who weren't white, who he had been friends with, were Hispanic backgrounds, and he said, I can't be friends with you anymore because you're Hispanic. I mean, it's ridiculous. And this guy just went. On 9/11 he went crazy and sort of lashed out at the liberals for sort of somehow creating a kind of atmosphere under which somebody like Osama bin Laden would want to attack us. He just was sort of completely opportunistic about getting media attention. He got the attention of right-wing conservative radio hosts, got on Fox News, went to Duke, and just again used this lacrosse incident as a way to be contrarian, because everybody had come out against the players and their behavior, and he just decided to take the other side. He got a lot of attention on Fox News and became a relatively well-known person, and moved on into politics, working for Jeff Sessions, and one thing led to another, and he joins the Trump campaign. And I was even on CNN with him a few times when he was just the most outrageous defender of all this crazy Trumpism, and now he's in the White House, and it is just insane. And the best part is that his family on his mother's side are all immigrants, and he's the one who's the author of the anti-immigration executive orders, and his mother's family wouldn't even have been allowed to come here based on if his executive order that he authored had been put through. I just can't believe that a guy like this, with no experience, with so young and immature and obviously out of control, is somebody that the president would have near him.
And it really is something, it seems like, that is kind of specific to Trump. I mean, I struggle to think of any of the other candidates on the Republican side. And there's only one candidate on the Republican side I liked, and liked would be an understatement. But I look at the rest of them, I give them credit. Ted Cruz, maybe he works in a Ted Cruz administration, but even that's a maybe. I mean, that's, you're right. I mean, it's sort of, he's perfectly in tune with Trump, and much like Steve Bannon, really has kind of learned to channel a lot of Trump's more primitive instincts. And it sounds like, I think he's finding a way to say, here are, things that you can say. Here's an effective way to channel what you really believe, and to be able to put his words in Trump's mouth.
Well, the funny thing is that Stephen Miller, has been espousing these views since he was 13. So now he's 31. That's 18 years. I mean, Trump just decided, okay, this is political opportunism. I'll sort of adopt the Bannon, Stephen Miller view of the world a year ago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Stephen Miller has been spewing this vitriol for 18 years, and Bannon probably just as long. And the amazing thing was his friends from high school, who of course can't believe that this guy has this job, and they can hear Stephen Miller's voice in Trump's speeches, and I'm sure it's incredibly disconcerting. And frankly, it's just such poor judgment on the president's part to have a guy like this around him. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it makes sense from Trump's point of view, such as it is, but, I'm with you on that, and that's where, again, if there's any one man who sort of, embodies, sort of the anti-ideas kind of platform in today's political life, and, just trolling as a substitute for that, it would seem to be Stephen Miller. And so I found it to be, like I said, a very interesting profile and something sort of in line with what we've been talking about for years about how the country's been moving in that direction. And of course, Trump was able to seize upon it successfully. And there are a great many reasons why, and as you've indicated, that Trump has been able to seize upon some of the insecurities that are out there and some of the things that in the global economy that are trends that are in a lot of ways irreversible, but things that he's been able to make some hay out of. And one of those is, just to kind of bring this around a little bit here, back to that and to looking at the economy, the whole trend of automation of jobs. And I have to tell you that just in my personal experience that I have seen in the last year with my own two eyes, that spreading into white-collar work, the likes of which I didn't think I'd see for a good ways into the future. But where it is now, much less what we're seeing with fast food places, what we've been seeing in manufacturing for some time now, et cetera, et cetera. So as you look down the scope of what's coming subsequently here, there are some futurists out there that have sounded a great warning about this and what it's going to mean when you have essentially a large chunk of the population that is essentially unemployable because there just aren't enough things to go around. Now, there are those who will tell you there will be new jobs created because of the robots, but where do you kind of come out on this, and how big of a bomb do you see that being that could explode subsequently here in the years to come as far as the devastation of the employable population?
Well, I think that's why we have President Trump now, because there's a lot of people who have lost their jobs due to automation, due to jobs going overseas where wages are lower, where as well as sort of the evolution of technology. I mean, GE once upon a time, and these are kind of round numbers, I may not be right, had 250,000 employees and had a market cap of $250 billion, so that's sort of $1 billion for each employee. Well, Facebook has, and again, round numbers, a market cap of probably $400 billion, and 30,000 employees, 35,000 employees. So you're getting this, incredible value to employee ratio that is very different than it used to be. Like a lot of wealth is being created, but not with very many people. And what does Facebook manufacture? It doesn't manufacture anything. So all those people who are trained for manufacturing, they're probably feeling, understandably stymied in their life, and it's very frustrating. You can't get a job that's means something to you, that gives you meaningful work. And people talk about, we'll just retrain them. Well, you're not going to retrain somebody who, worked on an assembly line making cars, and they're going to now code for Facebook. That's just not going to happen. So the question is, how do you grapple with that? And people talk about retraining all the time and providing money for retraining, but frankly, I'm not sure I see how people can be retrained for sort of the jobs that are available in the new economy. And I frankly see that can be solved easily either. And I think that's going to continue to make people angry and frustrated, and why there will always be a lot of support for somebody like a Trump who claims to be an outsider and who's going to blow up the system, but of course is just the worst possible messenger for that whole idea. I I think it's an incredibly important and valuable and worthwhile idea. I cannot understand why this country went for a guy like that, thinking that he was going to be the one who was going to be the right messenger of this message, a guy who lives on Fifth Avenue in a triplex apartment with, brown marble and flies around on a private jet. Why would a guy like that be the one who cares about people in the heartland? He says he does, and he says let's drain the swamp and let's blow it up, but he's been in office now 6 months. What has he done to help those people? All he's done is threaten to take away their health care. I just don't understand why anybody voted for this guy.
Well, I think
people are seeing that now.
Yeah, I think you nailed it as far as how Trump was able to take advantage of this phenomenon, because it is one of these things about life in the early 21st century that, again, cynical though it was, he was able to craft a message to, and frustrating though it was for anybody out there who supported candidates that had actual ideas and actually wanted to try to do some adventurous things to kind of tackle the problems that we have. But this is where we ended up now, and at the very least, it is the kind of thing that is going to continue to give material to great writers like yourself. I know that everything can be tracked subsequently here. WilliamCohen.com, Cohan, WilliamCohen.com. And your latest book, Why Wall Street Matters, again, super relevant with what's going on in the country right now, and hopefully that there will be the actual push for the kind of regulatory reform you're talking about. We can only hope subsequently. I don't know what the odds of that are going to be in terms of getting competent shepherding of that kind of legislation through the Congress, but one can always hope, I suppose. William, a great conversation as always. I appreciated it, and we're always talking about things current on the show here. I have to tell you that what a wonderful respite it is for me to get away from anything having to do with my Cleveland Cavaliers. That has become an increasingly painful subject over the last couple of weeks here. So to be able to dive into this stuff with you is a treat as always. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you, Rick. My pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to FDH Lounge mini episode number 856.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and The Periodic Table of Elements.